Hello, this is Melody, the massage therapist, and I'm with Tara. And I'm super excited because Tara has done something really amazing. And you can find her on Instagram, TaraJoy90 on Instagram, because Tara had a very adventurous year because she decided to... Go ahead, say how you say it.
Well, I decided to read a book published every year of the last 100 years for a total of 100 books.
So it's December 30th, 2019.
Yeah.
And so you started with 1920?
1920 to 2019.
So how did you come up with this idea?
It's sort of an anticlimactic answer because I was just on the internet. I don't even remember what site, but I saw an article or a list that was titled 100 Years of Books, and I think it was about books from the 20th century. But just that title just kind of started this idea in my head, and I just thought, I wonder if I could read 100 years of books. I wonder if I could read a book published every year of the last 100 years. So then
And the previous year, she read
133 books, but that's the first time I had ever read that many
books.
Yeah. So I got this idea and I just thought, well, I wonder if I can do it. So I started researching, seeing if I could find lists of books from every year, and I found that I could. So I decided to do it.
And so did you just start a list in July, or when did the idea take place?
The idea came, I think, about April of 2018, so a while ago.
So you started making a list?
Yeah, just slowly making a list.
And you looked in your own bookshelves?
Yeah, I started with that to see what books I already owned and what years they were from. Because part of the reason I wanted to do this is because, well, I love to read.
Me too.
Yeah, I know you do. We talk about books a lot.
Me too.
But I love to read. But I found that there was all these books that I had been wanting to read for years and years, but sometimes they just get pushed aside for a new book or something else. And so there were all these books that I really did want to read, and they just kept getting pushed aside for whatever reason. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this is so I could get to all those books. So I did start with my own bookshelves, and then I would just Google. So I'd Google like 1922 books. And then two sources were the most helpful. Goodreads, which is a kind of a social media site for books. They have a list of the 200 most popular books published in every year.
Wow.
I think it's popular as far as Goodreads, so Goodread users, what books are popular to them. So I'd use that. And then Wikipedia also has a page for literature that came out in every year. So I used those, and then I would just pick the one that looked most interesting to me. So I wasn't trying to do the bestseller of every year or a prize winner from every year. It was really just whatever book from that year I decided I wanted to read.
Were they all novels, or 90%?
They were mostly novels. I think I don't have the exact numbers, but I want to say 75 to 80% fiction, and then about 20% or so nonfiction.
Oh, and by the way, she got through her 100 books by the end of November?
Yeah, so 11 months it took.
In 11 months. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Mm-hmm. Did you have like 3 favorite books that stand out to you, 3 or 4?
Sure. I would say the top 2 are probably the easiest.
Oh, good.
After that, it gets a little harder.
Oh, right.
But there were really 2 that were real standouts for me. I mean, there was tons that I loved. My favorite book, I think, of the whole thing was a book called A Town Like Alice from 1950. It's by an author named Nevil Shute, Shute, I think it is. And it was a book I'd seen the title of, but didn't really know anything about. And I'm not going to tell you much about it because part of the joy of that reading experience was going in knowing nothing.
So did you ever read the back of the cover?
I almost never read the back of books because I feel like a lot of times they give too much away.
Oh, that's
and actually, I read the back of this book after I finished it, and it gave away one of the most delightful moments for me as a reader. It gave it away on the back. So if you're interested in this book, don't read the back. So that's one. And then I would say number 2 would be a book called Testament of Youth from 1933. This is by Vera Brittain. This is nonfiction. And Vera Brittain was a volunteer nurse in World War I. And she suffered really kind of unspeakable losses in her own personal life during World War I. But it is just a beautiful book. She has such a strong voice in it that when I finished it, I felt like I was saying goodbye to someone that I knew.
Right.
And it was also really long. So it was over 600 pages. So I was with her for a really long time.
Was that your longest book then?
It might have been. It's close to it, if not the longest. But it was just a phenomenal book. So those would be the top two. Number 3, I would probably pick Native Son from 1940, which is by Richard Wright, which is a book that really explores race and injustice. It's a novel, but it does those things really phenomenally well. So those would probably be my top 3.
Very cool.
And they're all really old.
Wow, that is really neat. Is there any book that you put down because you started it and you went, ugh,
Yes.
I just can't finish this?
Yes. I think 8 times.
8 different books.
I think I looked at those numbers. Yeah. So some I got like 2 pages in and I was like, nope, just the tone of it or something about it didn't work for me. One book I got 50 pages from the end.
Oh my gosh.
And
you were so invested.
So upset by it that I put it down. I'll tell you that was 1979's A Bend in the River. And it was just very misogynistic. Something happened that I was not okay with, and so
you had to put it away.
Yeah, and so then in all of those cases, I switched it out for another book. So some books I didn't finish, but I didn't count those for the year. I always found another book from that same year to replace it with.
Right.
The one that was probably the hardest for me to put down and choose another book was The Hobbit from 1937. And I know people treasure this book, and it wasn't bad. I just found that it wasn't really for me.
Right. Well, you're not a science.
I don't like fantasy. Yeah, but I still want to do it because it's The Hobbit.
Right.
Excuse me. And so I may return to it at some time, but
when you're not
down The
quite
Hobbit.
so pressured.
But it wasn't bad. I just didn't feel like it was for me right now.
Right. So do you have a favorite author from those 100 years? Wait, or should we ask it, what's your favorite author in general? Did you read your favorite author for the 100 years of reading?
No. I would say my 2 favorite authors, classics would be Charles Dickens, and he was dead before 1920, so I didn't read any of him.
Oh, right.
And then my other favorite author, and I apologize if I butcher his name, but it's Khaled Hosseini. He wrote The Kite Runner, A Thousand Splendid Suns. He's written 3 novels and 1 kind of picture book, and I've already read them, so they were not in the challenge. Those would probably be my 2 favorite authors. But I also love Anna Quindlen, and I did read one of hers in the challenge. I read one of her nonfiction.
Oh, neat.
And then I discovered some authors. One of the kind of biggest discoveries of this for me was the mystery genre. So I had never really read mysteries because I don't like violence at all in books or movies. I just my brain kind of grasps onto these images and they're hard for me to let go of. So I typically stay away from any violence. And I knew that not all mysteries had violence, but I didn't know how to tell if it did. So I just stayed away from mystery. But I decided to attempt it for this, and I started with Agatha Christie, and then I came to learn that these old British mysteries from the 20s, 30s, and 40s almost never have violence.
Wow.
I mean, there's a murder, but it's
they don't go into
detail about the actual murder, more the whodunit. And so I discovered all these mostly British mystery authors that I want to explore more now. So Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, Josephine Tey. So that was a really fun discovery for me too, to find this whole new genre where there's tons of books to read. I mean,
wow,
thousands probably that I can explore.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I know, but it's fun to discover
something to strive for.
Yeah.
So with your Instagram channel handle, what are some of the most commonly asked questions that your fans asked you?
So I did a Q&A at the end, and I would say the most common question was, what are you doing next?
Oh, right.
And my answer is nothing.
I'm just reading for enjoyment.
So I absolutely loved doing this, but for me personally, it would be not sustainable to try and do something on this scale every year. Just
you
because
have 2 kids.
I have 2 kids, and it's just a very rigid reading schedule. So I would, people would talk about a book, and I'd be like, oh, I want to read that, but I can't yet. So the most common question is, what are you doing next? So I'm not doing anything like this next. Although I did kind of feel like I found a little bit of a niche for myself in reviewing old books.
Oh, neat.
If you're not familiar, on Instagram there's a community that's called Bookstagram. It's not like an actual thing. It's not like a website, but it's just a community of readers who love to read and talk about books. And a lot of the people on Bookstagram typically review new books, which makes sense. But I kind of found this kind of space for myself of reviewing old books, because I did review all 100 of the books that I read.
Wow. So when you say you reviewed them, was it like a paragraph or a couple paragraphs?
Yeah,
You tried to...
a couple short paragraphs, I'd say, and then I'd give them all a star rating between 1 and 5. And so I think I'll continue to do that. So I'll continue to review old books.
The cat.
Sorry. I have a cat that has some upper respiratory issues. She'll be fine.
So were any of the books appropriate to read to your kids? Like at bedtime, or did you throw in a picture book?
I did not throw in any picture books, but there were definitely some like middle grade or young adult books. So I did not read any of those to the kids, just because I wanted to kind of keep on a pretty quick schedule for this, but there's definitely some that I could.
Right.
I read Holes from, I think, 98,
Oh, okay.
which I had not read as a kid because I was not a kid in 1998. And that
You
one
were
I
a
think
young adult.
that one I think the kids would enjoy. Watership Down was one of my favorites, and that was from the 70s, so that one I could see doing with the kids. I finally read Bridge to Terabithia, which I had never read that, and most of the people in my generation did read that when we were kids, but I just never got to it. So I don't know that I do that one with my kids, because it's really sad and they don't like sad books right now. But yeah, there were definitely some middle grade and YA in there. I would say maybe a dozen or so of the 100.
That's good.
Yeah.
So this wasn't pre-planned, but
Yeah.
what was your shortest book? Like, do you know how many pages your
My shortest was a poetry collection from either 1921 or 22. It was one of the earlier ones. It was by Edna St. Vincent Millay. I don't read a ton of poetry, but if I have a favorite poet, it would be her. And she was very famous in the 20s. Her poetry was very well regarded. And so because I really love her as a poet, and because she was important during that decade, I wanted to read one of her collections. So it was 50 pages.
Oh, that's so
of
nice.
Poetry. Yeah. So
The
that
poetry reads really fast.
So that was definitely the shortest. Although of the 100 books, the average page count was around 300. So it all, because some were 600, and so there were a couple in there that were short. I wouldn't include picture books, but other than that, anything was fair game. Yeah.
That's so great. How did you keep a record of the books you read, and how did you start your list? Did you keep it on your phone?
Yeah, it was basically all electronic. So it started out just in the Notes app on my phone. So when I started to make the list, it was just all in the Notes app. Once I had the 100 books, I transferred all that to a spreadsheet, and I use Google Sheets, which is really similar
Is that
to
your spreadsheet?
really similar to Excel.
Okay. Here's her list of her books.
That's the first time I printed it out, though. I'd never printed
that's
it
really
out.
exciting.
Yeah. And so,
like-
and it includes the year, the title, author, page numbers, a couple of other kind of points of data, and those would change as I would switch out books sometimes, but it was all in that one spreadsheet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Did you, I forgot. Can you go onto Instagram and see all your reviews then? You
yes.
can? Okay.
Right, yeah. So
Can you tell I don't have Instagram?
no, it's okay. So the Instagram doesn't have all of like the data here, but yes, all 100 books are reviewed on Instagram
At Tara Joy
90. Yeah, so it's all in my feed, and then I also I did not read in order. So
thank you for that.
yeah, so they're kind of posted all over. And the reason I didn't read in order is because I wanted to do it in a year, and I felt like I needed to be able to mood read a little bit. So what I felt like I wanted to read at a time.
I love how you said that. Mood read.
Yeah.
What
so
am
if
I in the mood
right,
for?
exactly. So sometimes I would read a few really heavy books in a
my
row,
gosh.
and then I needed something lighter.
Something
And if
light.
I had been reading in a row, I wouldn't necessarily have that flexibility. Yeah. So anyway, so on Instagram, they're in the order that I read them, which is not in the order of the years. But then I also saved to highlights each decade, so you
very
can go
cool.
and look at each decade.
Right. Very
and then it
cool.
is in order.
And then, I'm an audiobook reader because I couldn't imagine having to sit and read because I have too many things in my head. But anyways, Did you do any on audio or just a small amount when you knew you were driving?
Yeah,
Or?
I did some on audio. So I did calculate it. So I did 11 either in whole or in part on audio. So some of them I would go back and forth.
So you'd have the actual book and
Yes.
then you would go on the
Yes,
audio?
on some of them. Some were completely audio. Like I did for 1986, I did Howl's Moving Castle, which is a fantasy kind of children's book, and that was excellent on audiobook. So some I did completely on audio, but some I went back and forth. So a little bit. For me, I do like the audio format for some things. For me, what works best on audio is nonfiction.
Right.
Like memoir or more narrative kind of nonfiction, and then either children's books, so middle grader YA, or a book that is very plot driven. So I really like literary fiction, which isn't always plot driven, and those don't work for me as well on audiobook because I feel like I need to sit with some of it, like the sentences and things
Right.
sometimes. And just personally for me, that doesn't work for me as well on audio.
And do you ever underline things that are beautifully said in a book? Like books that you own?
Yes, I have kind of gotten away from underlining, but I'll use book darts. So like I'll flag a page with a
Oh.
book dart
Oh,
if there's
okay.
something that, yeah. So I definitely do
And
that.
an interesting thing about Tara is that she won't just read one book at a time. She'll have like 3 books going at the same time. Was this 4 like your max, or 2 or 3, or?
I would say 4 would probably be max, and I don't usually do that many at once. But and that goes back to the mood reading too. So if I'm reading a book that's really heavy, like when I was reading Testament of Youth, that's the one that takes place during World War One, or is about World War One. Sometimes that just feels heavy, and so I would need to set that one aside for a little bit. But I needed to read, in order to finish in time, I needed to read about 100 pages a day. And so sometimes I'd pick up something else to fill in that 100 pages a day when I needed a break from
Right.
the really heavy stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you,
You're welcome.
Tara.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, she said also that if it's 2 different authors,
Mm-hmm.
2 different decades of being written, but they're still at the same time.
Yeah.
You almost can't do
No.
those either because it's too
If
confusing.
they
in
feel
your head.
similar at all, I won't. It's
Yeah.
usually like a nonfiction and a fiction, or like a fantasy novel and something really grounded in reality. So
Right.
they have to be pretty
Right.
different. Yeah.
So.
That's true.
Well, thank you,
Thank
Tara.
you so much.
Thank you. Happy reading. Bye bye.